Okay, as you can tell, these videos that I am making are specifically inform and expose. I cover religious topics, and I also cover constitutional topics. If I was a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which I am not, then my video channel could only consist of religious material. I would not be able to have videos on the Constitution, and I would not be able to expose certain things that were going on in our government today which are wrong. The reason why I want to talk about this is that the 501c3 contract with the federal government is a legal contract that removes some of your rights as a religious institution to be activists in the political arena. Now, for instance, our First Amendment guarantees us the right to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble peacefully anywhere, in a home, in a park, in a building set aside for that purpose, and the right to redress of grievances. The reason for this is because our forefathers' ultimate intent was to preserve the Word of God while protecting other people's freedoms. Okay? Now, what the 501c3 specifically does is it removes your freedom of speech and it removes the freedom of the press so that you cannot publish politically active material that are of interest to the church, the pastor, the board members, and its congregation. This also effectively removes the right of the pastor and the teachers that teach the Sunday schools to inform and prepare people in a politically active society. So that cuts the church off from an entirely it cuts the church off basically, and its congregation members, from information that they may be able to receive at the church. Now, in times past, a church's function was to bring to light evils in the government which affect their congregation. And then it provides the means for the people to take legal action and even protest against these things. But and they would be able to, in the past, assemble in the church building and have a town hall meeting. With a 501c3, it is impossible to have a town hall meeting in a church building. A town hall meeting has to take place outside the church building and in a place that is not specifically designated for religious activity. So that's the one thing. That's the first thing that it does. You can't hold town meetings in a church anymore. The church used to be the primary place where political decisions were made. And also in a time of war, the church was a place where people could come to make specific decisions and strategies. They couldn't be armed in the church, okay? But they could come and meet at the church and they could discuss specific strategies to employ. And then when they left, they would go and employ those practices outside the church building and in defense of their town or their state or their nation. Well, the 501c3 makes this impossible. Okay, the other thing that it does is it allows the federal government to intervene and monitor a church's specific activities. And so what it does is it exposes the congregation members to federal government attention, which is illegal. The federal government, according to the Constitution and according to Amendments 3 through 5 and Amendment 14, cannot spy upon legally abiding citizens. And the 501c3 forces the church to expose congregation members to these spying activities. Because effectively, if you identify yourself with that church, you're also identifying yourself with the 501c3 requirement. And even though that 501c3 requirement applies only to the pastor and the board members and paid clergy otherwise, the federal government will try to make that apply to each individual congregation member as well. And it will seek to prevent the congregation from being politically active, and it will employ specific tools against congregation members who attempt to do so. And another thing that it does is if any of those congregation members are active in profitable activities and the federal government believes that they're making too much money, then they can also employ specific tools to frustrate that. Now, they can't do it legally, but because of the 501c3, the federal government will impute its power upon the church and its congregation members at will, because it can always say, well, church, you comply with these requirements or we will lift your 501c3. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to, now it's well known already that the 501c3 removes specific rights of the church, which can also translate into the removal of the specific rights of the congregation and individuals that go to it. So the purpose of this video is pastors and board members, if you have a 501c3, and you have to reapply for it every single year, or you have to apply for it every 5 years, and you're coming across an expiration date, you need to do some financial planning to see if your congregation is supporting that church enough to where you are able to pay taxes on the income. And the reason that I say this is because if you are capable of paying taxes on the income, then that is something that you should do. And then not only that, it will also eliminate many other churches which are using the 501c3 status, and they are abusing the privilege by hiding income or buying specific things and throwing it in storage for the purposes of ministry, which is what I've seen in Killeen, Texas. Because if your church and your congregation is not giving enough to the church to be profitable, then it cannot exist. And see, and that's another thing. If the church is taking part in specific improprieties and it has a 501c3, then the federal government can go to this church and say, hey, this is what's happening in your church and it's illegal. If you want to keep your 501c3 status, then you need to keep yourself in line. Okay? And so the church continues to participate in these improprieties for the 501c3 status, which may be hurting its congregation members. And then the federal government has a chokehold on the clergy and the staff. And if they're depending on the nonprofit status to operate, then when that 501c3 status is taken away, the church has to roll up the sidewalks and close its doors. Now, the reason why I won't give to any specific church is because they are under a 501c3 nonprofit status. Which means that when I give of my prosperity to a church, if I give a check or say I make a debit card transaction to give to the church, that exposes my finances and everything that I do to the federal government, because it provides them with all of my banking information, such as a routing transmit number, account number, debit card number, through the church. And because of the 501c3, the federal government can actually request financial records of tithing from the church about its congregation members. And since the general tithe is 10% of income, then the federal government can estimate with a great degree of accuracy how much a person is making, and then determine what they're going to do with that person if they believe in an increasingly socialist society that the person is making too much money. They can put a stop to it, halt it, or they can limit it. And they can do this because the 501c3 grants the federal government the freedom to intervene. And if you pastors and board members are actually taking part in the 501c3, you are actually taking a part in breaking the Constitution and in the removal of the rights of your congregation to their privacy. So what I'm saying is that you need to find a way to make your church profitable in the next few years. And you need to find a way to get out of the 501c3 and start paying taxes on those profits. What this essentially does is it releases you to educate and prepare your congregation, not only about religious activities, but also about political activities, and you may educate truthfully on liberal candidates as well as conservative candidates. And since the Bible and all doctrine related to the Bible is considered to be conservative, that means that a profitable church that is not on a non-profit status can become a very powerful, politically active wing on the side of conservatism. Blah, 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 blah. Conservatism. Which means that it would free the church up to influence government policy through the vote of the congregation. Which is another thing that Democrats are specifically trying to do, is limit the power of the people through the vote, through misinformation. And since a church generally has a 501c3, it cannot say anything on those government policies irregardless. The church has become powerless. Its teeth has been removed. And therefore, in this regard, the purpose of the church is of none effect. Now, I published a video last week, and I deleted it because I believe the people that needed to get the message got it. So you could take this as a continuation of that video, and this one's going to stay up. Because this particular church, what you have done is you have partnered with specific federal elements. And you have allowed those federal elements to illegally trample upon the rights of your congregation, even if that congregation is refusing to associate with you. And that means that you're breaking the law, and because of the 501c3, there's nothing you can do about it. So as soon as you're ready, you need to turn that church into a profitable organization and remove your 501c3 status. Because you have a responsibility to your congregation to protect them from stuff like this. Thank you very much.